Hi everyone, Jacob S. Paulson from ConcealedCarry.com. Just wanted to talk a little bit about how quickly you can access your gun in the middle of the night. Recently we did a huge research undertaking project. We sent a survey out to all of our readers and listeners and email subscribers to find out, how do you keep your gun at night? Do you keep it near the bed? Do you keep it in a safe, not in a safe? Is it chambered, ready to fire? Or do you need to rack the slide or insert a magazine? What kind of gun do you keep near the bed? Is it a semi-automatic, a shotgun, a revolver, a carbine? These are the questions we set out to answer, and as the data started to come in from the survey, the results were so interesting. So I thought that to do the topic real justice, another thing we needed to look at was, how long does it take to retrieve a gun in these different scenarios? So obviously I think all of us intuitively understand that it's going to be faster to retrieve a gun and fire if it's just sitting on top of my nightstand versus in a safe. But how much faster? That was the question I wanted to answer. So what I did is I set up a little experiment. And in this experiment, what I did is I set up the LASR system, software system with a SIRT pistol. I set a target at about, it's 15 feet from where I was standing next to my bed and next to my nightstand to the door to my bedroom, 15 feet. And I put a target, not unlike this one, on the door. And then using the LASR software system and a webcam, I outlined that target and I set a random start between 6 and 10 seconds. And then I readied the gun wherever I was going to test it. I hit go on the LASR software system and laid in bed and waited for the buzzer. And when the buzzer sounded, I jumped out of bed, retrieved the gun, and fired on target. And so we got a very accurate measurement of how long it took from buzzer to me being able to hit the target with the gun. And that was the data we did. I did various different versions of this. I did it with the gun on the nightstand, gun in the drawer of the nightstand. I used a handful of different types of safes to try to get a sense for key turn safes versus digital keypads and different brands and things like that. So I'm going to present some of that data here and talk through some of these things. First, a couple of disclaimers really that are really important. First and foremost, I want you to understand these times that we're referencing are obviously not accurately going to reflect how long it would take you in the middle of the night in an actual life-threatening emergency to retrieve the gun. One would expect that if I had actually been asleep under the covers in the dark, it would have taken a lot longer for me to retrieve the gun. In the fog of the night, trying to wake up, the adrenaline pumping with legitimate fear for my life and safety and that of my loved ones. That would have greatly increased the time. So these times are not meant to represent actual response times. They are only meant to be relative to each other to show us how much faster or slower is one method versus the other. So that's the objective here. Another disclaimer, it's worth noting that some of these retrieval methods would probably be even slower than their comparison methods if it was a life-threatening encounter because of fine versus gross motor skills. It's a fine motor skill to pick up a key, insert it into a lock, and turn it. And even when I was just trying to rush it as fast as I can, I could tell that that was a huge deterrent. But imagine if it had been a life-threatening encounter and I was overcoming the adrenaline and other things that would have been part of that. It potentially would have made it even slower than some of the other methods. So those are disclaimers that are worth noting as we dive into this. So what do we do here? First, let's look at just the gun on the nightstand. I ran this drill several times, and the fastest that I was able to retrieve the gun from just right off the top of the nightstand without any sort of gun safe or anything like that was 2.42 seconds. From buzzer going off, me laying in bed, to me having a shot on target at 15 feet. So 2.42 seconds. Now I did it a couple different times. I did it a total of 5 times, and my average across both of those across all those times is 2.51 seconds. So obviously this is going to be our benchmark. This is the fastest that I was able to respond. 2.51 seconds is my average time for this method, for just guns sitting on the top of the nightstand. Now there's some obvious concerns, particularly if you have children in the home, and we'll get to some of those things in the research and in the data that we show, but here's some more to consider. After that, what if I just put the gun in a drawer on the nightstand? So it's not sitting on the nightstand, but it's in a drawer on the nightstand. How much slower would that make me? Well, I did that drill 4 times, and it definitely slowed me down. My fastest in doing it that method was exactly 3 seconds, 3.00, but my average was 3.16. So the difference between 2.51 and 3.16, 0.65 seconds. So, relative in this context, how much does that matter? Well, you be the judge. So after that, let's talk about now using a handful of different kinds of safes. So of all the different kind of safe configurations I use, let me share with you what was the fastest. And the fastest was a Sports Afield side access safe with a 3-digit push button code. Now, I like the Sports Afield safes. The buttons are illuminated so you can see them really easily in the dark, and the interior is illuminated when it opens. It opens very fast. This is a very high quality safe, and it's a good size safe. They do very well. I'm a big fan, so I thought I'd give this a shot. Now, I tested this both using a 4-digit combination and then a 3-digit combination, because I thought, how much faster would it be if I just had to push one less button? So I did both of those several times. My average speed with a 4-digit combination, with having to push 4 buttons on the top of the safe to get it open, was 4.55 seconds. When I decreased it to only 3 digits into the safe, 4.02 seconds. And I think that one could, obviously make the argument that 4 digits is going to make it a lot easier to have a complicated combination. It's going to be more likely to deter someone who's breaking in. But I think the argument could also very easily be made that 3 digits on the safe might be more than sufficient to prevent, the vast majority of unauthorized people to access what's in the safe. So by just simply going from 4 digits to 3 digits, that dropped 0.53 seconds off of the open time or the response time. So half a second, more than half a second, just by making it one less button push on the safe. So that's something legitimately to consider. But if we're comparing bare gun on the nightstand to the Sports Afield 3-digit combination, so the difference between 2.51 seconds and 4.02 seconds, that's obviously a difference of 1.51 seconds. So full 1.5 seconds slower to retrieve the gun using even just the fastest I could, a 3-digit combination from that safe. That's a digital keypad versus just gun right on top of nightstand. So that's a significant difference. It's not twice as slow. It doesn't take twice as long, but it still adds a decent amount, 1.5 seconds. So, how important is that? Well, that's up to you. You got to weigh that into the consideration. How important is it that I be able to get this 1.5 seconds faster versus ensure that no one can access this unauthorized? So those are some things to think about. So again, as I said, 3-digit combination, average of 4.02. With the 4-digit combination on the Sports Afield safe, average of 4.55. So that gives you kind of a sense of those differences. So the next thing I thought I'd give it a try is I have a stack-on safe. This safe is meant to be a side mount safe, so it would mount in theory to the side of a nightstand or something like that. I thought that the best way to kind of really give it a apples to apples comparison was to put it on top of the nightstand the same way I had the other safes, and so you can kind of get a sense for how I did that here. Now it is, having learned from previously, I just went for a 3-digit combination. Now this safe is a little bit more slow to open. I mean, that was the biggest difference here. As you can tell, that I was able to punch in that combination. It's almost like I'm sitting there waiting for this safe to open to be able to retrieve the gun. So the average response time on a stack-on 3-digit safe, based on the 5 different attempts that I made on that, was 5.32 seconds. So 5.32 seconds is considerably slower now. I mean, not quite 3 seconds slower, but almost 3 seconds slower than just having the gun sitting right on the nightstand. And it's about 1.3 seconds slower than the 3-digit safe that was the Sports Afield safe, which was the side access safe, which had a spring-loaded door. So the difference between that spring-loaded door and the kind of gravity falling version of the stack-on side mount safe was significant, 1.3 seconds. Now, a lot of people also have these clamshell safes. These clamshell safes are the ones that just kind of open straight up off the top. The problem with these is obviously, in addition to putting in your combination, you then have to manually grab it and lift it to get the gun out. And so there's not, that's not inherently bad, except for it's obviously going to make it slower. So I decided to do some tests with the clamshell safes. And, that's going to obviously be very indicative. And I did it both with a 4-digit combination and with a 3-digit combination, believing that a 3-digit combination, as we already had learned, would be much faster, and it was. So using the clamshell 4-digit combination, my average response time was 5.42 seconds. 5.42. So that's quite a bit slower if you consider comparing that to when I was using the side access spring-loaded Sports of Field Safe with the 4-digit combination. That was 4.55 seconds. So almost a full second slower because I had to open that clamshell with my own hand to retrieve the gun versus having some sort of spring-loaded door. So that gives you some indications of what that might mean to you. Now the clamshell, the same safe when I just reduced it to 3 digits, the average response time, 4.59. So 4.59 is considerably faster. Now, compared to the 3-digit combination on the Sports of Field Safe of 4.02, it's still not as fast. It's basically a full half second slower to have to open that up. So that was kind of an interesting thing. If we're talking about 4 digits, it basically was adding a whole second almost to have to open that thing up. But if I only have to punch in 3 digits, we're really only adding a little bit more than a half a second to open up the clamshell and retrieve the gun. So regardless, though, if you're comparing it to our benchmark, our base, which is just having the gun sitting on top of the nightstand, which was 2.51 seconds, then the clamshell comes in overall with a 3-digit combination, the fastest we can make it, at 4.59 seconds, which is, of course, how much slower? 2.08 seconds slower. So let's just, basically 2 seconds slower. So the clamshell is considerably slower than the basic, just have the gun sitting on the nightstand. Kind of put that in perspective, what were we saying before from our benchmark? We said that the 3-digit Sports of Field Safe was only about 1.5 seconds versus this clamshell, which is about 2 seconds slower. So you can kind of see how it's getting worse as we go. It's still not quite as bad as that stack-on safe that was using gravity to open, but we're just not doing as well as we were before. 2 more things I thought I would test, which were keys. And I decided to just continue to use that same Sports of Field Safe, but instead of putting in the digit combination, I instead would insert the key and turn it to have that same spring-loaded door come open. Comparing this to the other Sports of Field Safe drills that I ran, this would give us a real good, clear indicator of how much slower is the key versus punching the buttons. Now, the first time I ran the drill, I was looking at it in terms of setting the key just right next to the safe. So all I had to do was pick up that key and insert it into the safe. But it occurred to me that that's not very practical, because what's the point of having the safe locked at all if the key sits right next to it? So my time with the key sitting right next to the safe on average was 5.3 seconds. But I, after that, decided to go ahead and put the key in the drawer to get a sense for how that would change things. So I had to jump out of the bed, open the drawer, get the key, stick it in the safe, turn the lock, then retrieve the gun and fire on target. And my average time in that configuration was 5.74 seconds. So 5.74 seconds is considerably slower than the 2.51 getting off of the nightstand, as we would already suspect. But how much slower is it than just punching the buttons? So in other words, looking at the exact same safe, turn the key versus punching buttons, what's the difference? Well, the difference is 5.74 versus 4.02, which is, of course, a difference of 1.72 seconds. So you're adding more than 1.5 seconds to use a key than to punch in a combination. And that's assuming that the key is just right there in that drawer of that nightstand. If you have to retrieve the key from who knows where else in the house or in the room, that would obviously make it even more significantly slower. So those are some things to consider. Another question that we need to answer is, how much time does a person have? And this is a lot more subjective, because depending on your house, where your bedroom's located, it's entirely easy to assume that a person might feel like they have a lot more time if the bedroom is on a 2nd or 3rd level from where any of the entry points are to the house. And also, the other challenge with trying to calculate how much time you have is understanding that where that person is in the house when you begin to react is going to vary. If you begin to react the second there's a breach, a door opens, an exterior door, and they're on the threshold, that obviously is going to give you a lot more time than they've already broken in, they've already snuck in, and they're in the house, and you don't hear them until they start coming up the stairs, or until they step on that creaky wooden floor, or whatever it might be. So that's kind of subjective. That's kind of hard to look at, I think, in lots of ways. Obviously, you want to have as much good physical security as you can to maximize the amount of response time you can have. But hopefully this was helpful in giving you some sense for how much slower are some methods versus others. A quick side note here, something else that I know a lot of people might say as well, is the Sports Afield safe, the one we were testing with, is it as fast as any other? So I did grab the comparable Gun Vault safe, which is also a very reputable brand. It's the comparable safe, and I ran some tests to see, is one faster than the other? Are they comparable? And I found that the Gun Vault safe was slightly faster. I don't know that I could even put a time on it. It's definitely not like a second faster or a half a second faster or even probably a quarter a second faster. But it just, as you can see here, was a tad bit faster. So if that was relevant to you, that's something to consider. Now, comparing the two, I would say, though, that the Sports Afield had illuminated buttons, which the Gun Vault did not, and the Sports Afield safe had illuminated interior, which the Gun Vault safes do not. So if that matters to you, that's another thing to consider. But look for upcoming content from us and comparing these different safes above and beyond just reaction time.